So when we take into consideration traditional destinations, country, they have almost 70. When we take Italy, is basically the half. I have two data sets that I try to consider together, so I try to make it as similar as possible. Those are the invasive data, so the competencies tests that we have in Italy, and the other one is SILS4U, which is an international but comparable data set of four countries, which are England, Sweden, Germany, and Netherlands. So, my dependent variable is linguistics test scores, and I use the sum of correct answers, which has been standardized. Most important is what I do with the independent variable, because I'm interested both in the immigration gap, so immigrant native gap, but also a bit more into the gap between majority and minorities. I have two independent variables, explanatory variable. One is migration, which is simply a dummy that tells where you are born. If you are born in Italy or in the survey country, then you have 0. If you have born somewhere else, you have 1. If we move to the second, it's a little bit more tricky, and here I created macro-geographical area of origin on the basis of the parents' place of birth, independently of where the student was born. I had, unluckily, to restrict the invasive coding that can help us disentangle the southern country from European Union, Europe, but not European Union, and all the rest of the world. So I'm going to say that this is a limitation. I think that everybody of you can agree on this, but this is what I could have done with this data.
Why 27?
I think because we collected this in
no
2012.
No Croatia.
Yeah, so it was still not there. As content variables, I use parental education for socioeconomic status, the sex of the student, the year of birth. This is because they sample students, but on the basis of the class. The class was the unit of analysis. The majority of students are between 13 and 14 years old, but there are also some younger and some older students, especially older with respect to migrants. And I also have some variable out of the contextual level, which are the percentages of foreign students and the percentages of, that is a little bit tricky. So for SIS4U here, I have the average score on the Treiman index of socioeconomic status, while for IPALSI I have the percentage of children of parents from the elites, so from the upper class. Also, this is a limitation of the study that I'm going to cover for now, and then simply tell for those of you that are interested in the technicalities that I'm going to show you some results from two-level random intersection two-level models that are run separately by country. I have two hypotheses, and basically both tell us that no matter if I look at the immigrant native gap or the majority minority gap, I'm going to see that Italy fares worse. This is our hypothesis. So what we have here several countries, and each of that has a specific type of model of incorporation. We have Sweden as operant tolerant. Netherlands is a little bit in between a multiculturalist model of incorporation and a segregationalist model with respect to welfare regimes. England is a little bit more close to the Sweden part. There should have been much more to say about the differences in models of incorporation, but I would like to stress the difference between a no model of incorporation and all the rest, at least for this presentation. So what you see here in this line is basically the average competence level for persons that are not migrant. So these are students that are born in England, students that are born in Sweden, students that are born in Netherlands, in Germany, and in Italy. And what we see here is the difference for people that instead are born somewhere else, average. So you can see here the gap between the native average and the average of immigrants. Oh well, yeah, you see there are differences between countries that might be really interesting, but for the easiness of discussion, first, let me ask you a question. Where would you locate Italy? Somewhere here, so remember that we expect that Italy face wars, will be somewhere here or completely out of range. Really bad result. So everything that is on this side means that in Italy, or well, everything that is on this side means that we have a gap. So immigrant students go worse, and the more they are on this side, the worse is the situation. So where will you put Italy? This one here?
University.
This one here? No, these are students at age 13, 14. So they are basically at the
because in university you have high level results for students coming from nursery campuses.
Yeah. So these are 13 years old. Very bad? Not that bad? So look at what I found. So actually, we cannot, this is just a qualitative comparison because you have to remember that coefficients come from different models that are run separately by country, so we cannot really compare them. But just qualitatively, we can actually see that Italy does not go that much worse than the other country. If we have to find an outlier, actually here is England. While all the other, like, more continental countries are both on basically more or less same level. But before thinking about an outlier, let me run the same exercise on the minority-majority gap. So what we have here is the ethnic majority in each country. So people from England, Swedish people, Dutch, German, and Italian. And we can also see the gap. And the gap is for, in this case, people coming from Eastern Europe, extra Europe. Actually, this means all the world, but yeah, just think about the person from extra Europe are usually those that face wars with respect to people that come from Europe. So at least this we can say. So, where Italy is going to be? Do you think it's going to be out of range? More or less here? Now you are just already prepared. Yeah. Also here, we again cannot consider the overlap as a statistically insignificant overlap. It's just a qualitative comparison. But you see that Italy is more or less working the same like the others. So it's not that difference. The gap that we see is basically half of a standard deviation from the average mean. Basically, a little bit less if we take European migrants that are not part of the EU. Also here, Italy does not fade away as an outlier. Let me show you the last surprise for today. Where Italy is going to be? Look at that. Then when we take all the students from European Union, and in Italy we know that the majority of students from European Union for us are Romanians because they are basically 1/4 of the entire immigration population. When we take them, actually we see no difference with respect to the average mean. Of course we cannot see the overlap with the others, but what we can see is that this difference is not statistically significant. The difference for all the other countries is statistically significant from the average. So that means that here we don't have a gap. In all the other countries with the model of incorporation, we have a gap. So, how I can prove that what I found does not come from some technical problem in the empirical strategy? I have done some robustness check. They are not all of them that I should do, but at least for thinking about that, I run the same exercise on mathematical competencies. Of course, migrants do worse with the linguistic competencies than mathematical competencies. Everything moves a bit close to the average, but when we look at the pattern across country, more or less the picture is the same. I didn't do that for the main analysis because the measure of mathematical competencies is different between the data set. So for 6-4U, we have more cognitive competencies. So the students were shown like pictures, pattern of pictures without words, and they should have answered. So a logical test. Well, in Brazil, we have problems. So the farmer, Giulio, went to the field. He has 300,000 meters, and so it's more dependent on the linguistic knowledge. But even in this case, the pattern across country does not affect that much. I tried a different coding of ethnicity. Maybe if you have questions, I can go a little bit further down into that. But for now, just say this is done and does not change that much. I also did parental occupation, and also this does not change that much. The problem is that the coding is different within the data set, so it's not really good to use parental occupation as the sole variable, but I think that as a control to the parental education makes sense. And also in this case does not change too much. In this analysis, I didn't take into consideration the type of school, so the track that students are following. Of course, for Italy, there's no problem because they are all together. But think about Germany. Think about the Netherlands. They are already tracked in specific parts of the educational system. In this analysis, you don't see the net effect from that, but I also have done something. I still have to develop, but the very first results are encouraging. So it seems that what we saw is not hiding the effect of the type of school. And I also did the same analysis with university students, but for the first year of Scuola Media, instead of the third. What you saw come from the very, very few waves of invalsi that were used as exams. That's why I thought maybe the situation in which they had to fill in this test was different. So I tried the same with data from the 6th grade. No difference at all in the pattern across campus. So conclusion for now. It would be really hard to sustain after the data that we saw that the absence of a model of incorporation necessarily lead to lower educational outcome, at least in terms of linguistic competencies of children of immigrants. There are a bunch of limitations. Of course, the data are different, so this will come with some technical problem. I don't have ethnic groups, so I cannot tell exactly what happens, at least for Italy. I can do something for the other European country, and for example, this value here that you see for England, I can tell you that comes from the Indian population because they can speak a bit, they can speak English, not always clear. I have colleagues from India and I have problem understanding them, but they are really able to they speak English, and so children of immigrants here face quite well. And this is also in line with the rest of the literature. I just focus on structural integration. So not on cultural integration. So what about the fact of the model of incorporation of cultural integration? On the, also on the identity dimension of integration. I cannot say nothing about that. Last but not least, I didn't have any specific measure of models of incorporation. So at the moment I can just say that we really can see Italy as an outlier from the pattern, but I cannot really tell you which part is producing this similarity. So it could be that, for example, there are effects that cancels out. So I thought about the system of education, but we will see this like pattern like that. So not outliers, only if the model of integration goes in a direction, and there is another important variable that goes in another direction, and so the two effects cancels out. I still have to think about if this could really happen, and I'm really looking forward to know if you have comments on that. But yeah, that is it. I just hope that we can doubt the fact that the non-model of incorporation necessarily lead to progress for citizens. And then the question is, okay, why we need policies? But this is just a broader, broader question. Thank you.
Allora, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. We had the opportunity to investigate the long-term consequences of immigration because Eleonora paid attention to the children of immigrants. And I want to stress that I think that there are a lot of strong points in your paper, even if it's just preliminary. And okay,
She's also the discussant.
yes.
Yes. I always think that this time there's an answer. After, yes.
And I want to say something about two strong points, in my opinion. The first one is your effort in order to compare Italy with other European countries. And so there is also an extra effort in order to find out data that are available in order to do this comparison. And you are very brave. You are brave because she wants to use Invalsi data that, you know, that there are some problems, but this is an interesting escamotage that we used. And so it's important, and it is a relief for me to know that there isn't this big divide between southern and northern European countries, with reference to the educational outcomes and linguistic competencies of immigrants. And it's also another relief is that your findings are consistent with the findings of other researchers. So it's a good point. And the second strong point is the fact that you want also, at least in your paper, and then I saw that you changed some word in your presentation, because in the paper she stressed the fact that she wanted to explore also the impact, the effect of ethnicity on the educational outcomes of immigrants. And this variable is very important because we know that belonging to a specific culture connected to a specific country of origin may have an important impact on the educational path of the student. And for the researchers who are used to performing analysis with quantitative data, we know that it's not so easy because we use samples, and if you split your sample into the different ethnicities, you can say nothing about this aspect. So it's important to pay attention to this aspect, but as you know very well, she has to use just three categories that are European Union, students from the European Union, extra-Europe, and Europe not EU. And the problem is due to the fact that she wants to investigate Italy, and Invalsi database gives just this type of information. But it's something, and something is better than nothing. And so, thank you very much. I think that these findings are very interesting, and I think that these strong points of your presentation may be also some weaknesses, may become some weaknesses, but you can overcome this problem easily, I think so. Because if you want to compare different countries, you have to stress the fact that these countries, and do stress these aspects, have different characteristics in terms of immigration, the composition of the immigrant population, the different stages of immigration, and with reference to the different ethnicity. And for example, in the first graph, you try to explain why extra-European students in England perform so well if compared to the other foreigners in the other country. And you say we know that there are a lot of Indian students and they are higher achievers others, and they speak very well, they understand and they can speak English, and so we can give this type of explanation. So, but your data tells nothing about that. So my suggestion is to display a table in which you can show the different composition of the foreign population or of the student population in order to sustain your interpretation of your data. And the same is, for example, for the case of the European Union, the students from the European Union in Italy. And we know that the majority of those of that group is made of Romanian. But if you have some data that can support your interpretation, could be useful. And I really appreciate that you ran different models for the different countries, and I think that you could also try to run models considering the different time spent in the host country, in the receiving country by the different by the students. I know that you want to use this psychological theory that pays attention to the distinction between native born or non-native, because the experience of migration may have a negative effect on the well-being of the students, but just for I am curious to see if something else comes out if you use this type of variable. And I have a question, and with reference to the case of Germany. Turkish students are in the Europe, not EU. Okay, so this can explain, can tell us something. So,
Answers.
there is another question.
No,
Do you want to answer
no.
another one?
She killed me so before.
What if I answer to this and then take the others?
Yes.
Okay. But thank you very much. This is really useful for the paper, and definitely I'm going to put more descriptive. I have to admit that I didn't have the possibility to send the full paper, but just in between an abstract, normal abstract and a long abstract, so like 5 pages with basically very few things. So thank you very much for these very interesting comments, even if I didn't provide you with full information. But definitely descriptive statistics are going to be there. Another thing that I actually thought, and maybe you can help me find out if this could work. So what I can do is actually like break into groups all these coefficients. So show, for example, okay, this is the general result, and then I can have a table for these 4 countries with ethnicity. But is that I can't do it for Italy, and so my question is, that is going to be a plus? Or, but for the argument of the paper, do you think would be?
No, I think that it's just a mess. Because you cannot perform this type of analysis for Italy. So you can write another paper and you can
actually that was my PhD thesis. That's why I really
this is a problem.
Yeah, definitely a problem. And in fact, in my PhD thesis, when I ended in comparison between country, I didn't go too far away with Italy. So I have a chapter on Italy and some more descriptive things with other country. But then when I addressed what I was saying there before is that in my PhD thesis I try to stress the fact that we have mechanisms to explain why migrants fare not that good, and mechanisms that explain why ethnic groups goes not that good. So I try to disentangle these two effects. And that's why I keep with that, even if if I move the topic a bit, model of incorporation, and yeah, maybe it could be interesting, as you said, like a very nice descriptive table with percentage, and maybe for that I can use what I have in the sample for the 4 countries, and for Italy just descriptive statistics on the new data.
Yes.
On the lower secondary school, and so that is not what the same that I have in this data, but that is a representative sample, and then should work out. So this I'm actually going to do. Yes, the problem that we still don't have data more precise on ethnic groups in Italy, and the structural integration is really a pity. I actually think that we should try to convince our international peers to put also Southern European country in their big projects, because here I feel that I'm still halfway. So all the studies that I found before are more into this migrant or native. Here I try to move a bit more into this ethnicity thing, but I'm not going to say ethnicity anymore. I'm going to take it away. But yes, it's still halfway. It's not a satisfactory point at the moment. With respect to the first and second generation, maybe I can simply try to do that at the very beginning, and then disentangle migration background, and then majority minority gap, and that might show a nice initial picture, because that is more comparable also to the literal thing. So yeah, I'm going to definitely try to do this.
Patrizia, she's a lady.
I have to say that I'm not so, and I really appreciate your paper and this wonderful that Southern Europe and is included in this kind of analysis. So thanks. And I have to say that I'm not so surprised from this kind of result, and for 2 reasons. First of all, because Italy spent a lot of money on private schools, and also for the strange school that is between the primary and the secondary school that we have. And in virtue terms, we spend more on this kind of school than on the secondary school. So I can imagine that the investment in primary school and also in intermediate school can produce some effects in terms of quality of the school, and also in terms of ability of the school to develop projects for every kind of needs and situation. And the other point that surprised me was the first table that you showed, where before your analysis, the fact that Italy has 34 the degree of policy, integration policy, migration policy. So, and I don't think this is, I think it's better in the sense that when countries start to focus on migration policies instead of work on inclusion as a whole, I think that in this way you are working on a project that segregates. So if you work on inclusion policy, regardless the kind of people that express needs, you can get better results. And this is not true for the secondary school in Italy, for instance, that is very segregated, the lyceum, the technical school. So I'm sure that you will get different results for at the end of the secondary school. But for the primary school that is so flexible, that is so financed, and where there are a lot of projects and also extra teacher to work with children with any kind of problems, and so to work also with migrant sons and daughters, so that's the problem. And even if that score is not good for Italy, it doesn't mean that inclusion policy are not developed. simply don't call them migration policy.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you explain better the difference between integration and inclusion? I don't understand.
No, I don't. I wasn't saying this.
What is wrong with the integration index?
No, we don't call migrant integration policy. It's inclusion for
Or
everybody.
in general.
In general.
Not
I
for
mean, in
migrants.
primary school, you don't have project for migrants. You have project for children with
Abilities.
and special needs. It means linguistic needs, communication needs, and physical needs. It depends. But you don't call it migrant integration policy. It's a general inclusion.
In Germany, you cannot. You can stay at school in Germany if you don't know language. If you have 5 years, you stay in another classroom, and when you learn, you can go in the other classroom.
If you don't speak
If you are in
English,
Bayern, yes.
you are moved to special needs schools in according to the
Yeah.
time, which means that
So
you are
the
basically
most
take away.
segregation that you can imagine.
So I was actually thinking that, so what we have
Buona
here,
pescazione, amica, perché
how they compute these migrant integration policies is on the basis of values that experts give. So it's not they evaluated policies, but they basically interview experts that could have said something, and they average I don't remember how many for each indicator they asked, but they were not that many. So not 100. I think it was more in the number of 10, something like that. I should check, but there were not that many. And then they averaged the numbers for each of these indicators, and then they average that all together. And this is the average of the idea of experts. So it's not that it's completely a picture of what is going on in like perfect terms. Could be maybe interesting to disentangle this value on the specific one, because these are really the last two, or maybe also the third, are more focused on migration, maybe, but the access to education is more general, is related to giving information to people that need, to facilitate scholastic participation with vouchers that could be used to eat at school, for example. So at least that one should not be completely related to migration as such. So it might be interesting, I was thinking about maybe having a table with the specific mean for each of these indicators, and then see if Italy is like that bad in all of them, or it's just the mean that is telling us this number. This is something I can definitely do, and it seems interesting. What I would like also to stress is that there are not that much differences between Italy, Greece, and Spain. And Portugal somehow is an outlier in its distribution. There are not that many studies on Portugal, so at the moment I cannot really say why and which type of migration they have. Actually, Portugal is even less.
No, Brazilian.
No,
Brazilian, and there is no
Speaking,
barrier, actually.
They had an empire.
Brazilian people coming from Congo, from Angola, Mozambique.
And also Brazilian, therefore there is no language barrier in school.
Yesterday,
I think
colleague
it's easier to
explained.
perform in this index.
That's why. But I mean, these are index of policies. So
It's not
this is
barrier.
experts telling that they have policies for integration of migrants. That's why we have this huge number for Portugal that I still have question mark on that. But what I would like to stress is the fact that the numbers that we have, even if they maybe we cannot really take as a perfect picture of the reality, so it's just a re-elaboration of the reality, they go in the same direction, telling that in this country something is going wrong with respect to.
And for instance, targeted needs are not the responsible of the state, so depends on national policies, but are in charge for local communities. So you can find any kind of situation in this because of regional policies, because they are regional policies. So I can imagine that the place you interview people can produce different answers. So one of the things every time we work on welfare in Italy, the problem is that apart from very few items, the welfare policy in Italy is on a regional basis. And so you cannot describe the national welfare policy because it doesn't exist national policy. That's why you always put Italy out of the model, of any model. Because you can find there are clearly coherent model, but regional models.
That's why, like, overall, we don't have a coherent model of integration. We just have
national level.
Yeah, this. And overall, we miss. Think about France and how much they put effort into the assimilation of their migrant. Think about Germany, how they close their eyes. There is really frequently in the literature the idea that they don't recognize themselves as an immigration country, which from this side of the Alps is kind of like, okay, how could you? But yeah, thank you. I will try to do this and see if I maybe just explain a little bit more why Italy has this low number.
So we have 5 minutes, so only brief comments and a question. But you use some countries, but if you want to verify if is the model, that is the school open with the possibility for all people to increase, to learn, without the problem for income, for revenue of family, why don't you use France, Luxembourg and Belgium? Because you have the same system, but of Italy, with some difference, but the idea that all people can go to the school with the same right. In Germany, if you are not able in the first 4 years, you cannot go in some school. If you are in Belgium, in France or in Italy, you have in elementary school some problems, but you can also go to the lycée. Okay? So, because if you see the case of Belgium, you can, I think that you could verify that people coming from former colonies and people coming from Italy, Hungary, etc., has the same results of the other. If you are in northern France, you see the same. And for your curiosity, also analyze Luxembourg. It's very small, but is in Europe the country with a greatest percentage of foreigners people. In this case, if you study the integration of Italian and Portugal people, you can see that there is a low level for students for me, but this is not my opinion because I teach. But the idea is the similar. It's difficult to find that if you are Luxembourg people from 3 generations, or you come from Italian family or Portuguese family, you have a different result. Because the school, the idea is when you start the inclusion. If your name is Tedeschi or is coming from Congo, in Belgium you have no problem. Also in Luxembourg. If you're coming from Lisbon or from Rome or from Luxembourg, it's the same. On the contrary, if you are in Dutch school, you have some problem to the start. And if you are in Germany, you have a great selection before, in the first years. And finally, in Valsi, you have no choice, I understand, but in Valsi was one of the worst examples. Because in Valsi is terrible. And moreover, because I saw what happens in Northern Europe. All people at school prepare to make better in Valsi test. In Italy, we follow the contrary. We study in a following a way, and after you have to prepare for Invalsi. This is not genial, but this is it's okay. But you are the most important excuses is the only one database, data access that you have. But you have for me in the notes when you prepare introduction, explain this because someone can tell you why you use Invalsi text. We have the worst in Italy. Okay. And because VC you have the problem of region. In northern region you have the best results, and in southern region it seems that they are not able to study. It's okay, it's not real. with discussion with Invalsi that he had terrible results. But the problem is not they don't study, because they don't prepare for this test.
We are clever too.
Yeah, so I actually go super quick. I think that would be just simply so great to put France, Belgium, and Luxembourg in, especially because as you can see here, I have no example from the pure assimilationist model, but data on France case are basically impossible to have, and also because they don't like to measure migrants data, because they are so into this assimilation thing that they just...
Because if you bring banlieue, you have some results. You bring Northern France, Alsace, you have another result. If you bring Paris, change all.
Yeah, but so as a national data set is basically impossible to do it
Yes.
here. Maybe it would be easier, I will try to have access to Belgium data and Luxembourg data, but actually as models of the cooperation, they are also represented here. So Belgium, if I don't mistaken, should be something between a multiculturalist and an open and tolerant type of models of the cooperation. I think in the literature is more close to the multiculturalist. And then Luxembourg is in the area of selective regimes with Austria, and Germany. So actually, your point is to the difference between models of cooperation and educational system, which is a very good point, and also I have that in mind, and I think I should elaborate more on how to convince the audience about this. I will do that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.